Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are talking about the Weather Service because the Weather Service probably needs to upgrade their data plan. This is insane, especially coming from an entity from the government as massive as the Weather Service, but here we are. This is coming from Cron, and I thought this was a really interesting article. Now, for the past decade, the Weather Service, or the National Weather Service rather, has been plagued by failures in various critical forecasts and warning information that is obviously aimed at protecting all of our lives, saving infrastructure and property from damage, all of this. But in some cases, its websites have gone down during severe weather events, or it's been unable to actually handle the demand of people simply just trying to access and connect to their information. There are other agency systems, which include information and data streams that deliver vital weather modeling to broadcast meteorologists and commercial users, have also suffered periodic outages as well. Now, during basically this insane year that has seen wildfires and a crazy hurricane season and everything else, the Weather Service says that it has an internet bandwidth issue and it's looking to throttle back the amount of data that essentially its most demanding users can access. The Weather Service, which is part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, actually announced proposal limits on November 18th of this year. Now, the Weather Service's proposed remedy is to limit users to 60 connections per minute on a large number of its websites that provide weather observations, forecasts, warnings, computer model data, air quality information, aviation weather support, and oceanic conditions as well. That may seem like what 60 connections a minute kind of thing, but believe me, that is a drop in the bucket compared to what a lot of people are pulling. And according to Susan Buchanan, who is the spokesperson for the National Weather Service, and I quote, "We want to exceed the needs of our stakeholders and partners. However, we are challenged with bandwidth limitations as models and observations improve and data size increases. User requests for data continue to increase, and without imposing some type of mitigation, the bandwidth situation will worsen, potentially impacting a large number of users." Now, according to companies that are basically getting this large amount of data, the proposed limit will substantially harm the services they provide to their customers. The possible negative effects on forecasts have also raised issues in the U.S. Congress as well. Now, Cron lists a whole bunch of different companies that are ingesting the data from the National Weather Service, but one of the big ones that you might have heard of is Accuweather. They are one of these companies. They are warning that this proposed solution would actually harm both the timeliness and the accuracy of their forecasts, as well as severe weather warnings as they go out and push it to the app that you have on your phone. Their spokesperson said that the data collection, processing, and distribution of weather information are the agency's quote-unquote most important services. Now, that person is Jason Porter, and he is the vice president and general manager at Accuweather, and he wrote, and I quote, "Limiting the amount of data that can be accessed conflicts with this vital mission and will negatively and possibly catastrophically impact individuals and businesses that rely on this data to make critical life-saving decisions when seconds count and lives are on the line." Now, ordinary weather customers who get their information primarily from weather apps on their phone, Android, iPhone, on and on and on, would also be affected by this proposal because the forecasts and weather alerts they receive are based on the computer modeling output and radar data, most of which actually comes from the National Weather Service. That's right. Accuweather is taking a good chunk of what you see on their app, as well as a slew of other weather apps, and they're getting it directly from the National Weather Service and basically repackaging it into, let's say, a more streamlined app with their own forecasting, whatever. But without that, that directly affects whatever app you're probably running. And that's obviously a huge issue. Now, many private weather companies develop their own computer models for forecasting, but they're still using the National Weather Service's data. So, for example, Boston-based Climacell, which was another one that was mentioned in the Cron article, they specialize in weather intelligence, and they said they'd also be affected by this. But the bigger picture concerns is how the NOAA as a whole would then fall behind its competitors in Europe and elsewhere. That's right, there is competition in the National Weather Service game at the state level. Now, Ray Goffer, who is a co-founder and chief strategy officer of that company, said this move could hurt the Weather Service's competitiveness if it is not limited essentially to the short term, meaning they throttle it down and then throttle it back up. And so I think this is actually really interesting. I read this article yesterday, and I've been pondering it, since last night. I don't have a weather app on my phone. I don't typically check the weather, but when I do, I usually just go to weather.com. I've got it bookmarked. It pops up, my local area, or if I'm going somewhere, flying somewhere, I'll Google weather, space wherever I'm going, just to kind of see the forecast. But that is directly impacting it. And I was wondering just how much this would impact me. Would I get into my car and drive somewhere if I didn't realize, or if, let's say, I didn't know a massive storm was coming and it would be unsafe for me to drive on the roads? I mean, I think there are some real impacts to this. I'm also wondering why the National Weather Service is limiting in its bandwidth. Of course, every government agency has a budget that is publicly, I just combine those two words, a budget that is publicly available. And so we know how much money the National Weather Service tends to spend, as well as the entire NOAA. And if they have these people or these organizations like Accuweather that are ingesting a large amount of data, I'm sure they're already paying for this. Why not just up that charge? And so I'm curious to see where this is going to go. But when we are talking about, let's say, the critical infrastructure and well-being, or no damage to it, lack thereof, this is one of those ones where I don't think we necessarily want to cheap out, because I think it directly affects everybody in the long term. And while I don't check the weather every day, when I do have some place to go, or I'm planning, let's say, I'm going to go, drive somewhere for the weekend or whatever, 2-3 hours away. Now suddenly I've got I don't have the weather forecast that tells me, well, it's going to be a blizzard in the mountains. You probably shouldn't be driving around in the mountains this weekend. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And so I think it's important. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but when we just went through a pandemic where we were removing bandwidth caps, and all the Netflixes of the world and the Verizons and the Comcasts were basically saying, we're not going to throttle you because you're all working from home. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Go binge watch Netflix 24/7. Why is the Weather Service having this problem? I'm curious to know the answer to that, and so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.